for the Onyx News. Extraterrestrials, time anomalies, dimensions, remote viewing, UFOs, UAPs, and USOs, ghostly encounters, abductions, Bigfoot, and more. Your end of the week news source for everything unexplained. Here is your host for the Onyx News Podcast, Margie K.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Onyx News. I'm your host, Margie K. We're here every Friday at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I just want to run over a couple of things before we get to our guest speaker this evening. Our latest issue of Onyx Magazine is out and available, and you can get a free copy with a free membership at the Onyx Network. Just go to onyxnetwork.com, and you are going to like this issue. I think it is our best yet. Now, we had the Into the Rabbit Hole contest, and the winner of that contest for his essay, which you are going to love, and it's going to be published in the next issue, is James Bear. And we actually had two really good articles, and we're going to publish both of those, so be on the lookout for that. I want to mention my latest book that just recently came out. It's the 50th anniversary of the Southeast Missouri Ozarks UFO flap, and it was written by myself and Debbie Ziegelmeyer. I think you're going to love that. That's available on Amazon. And two conferences coming up I just want to mention real quickly. The Philadelphia UFO Exposure Con is Saturday, May 20th, 2023 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You can get more information about that on our website at onyxnetwork.com. And then the Journey to Truth Conference, May 22nd to the 25th in Grafton, Illinois at a really nice resort. There are a lot of speakers, 11 speakers over 4 days. That is going to be a good conference. Don't miss that one either. JourneyToTruthCon.com. All right, my guest this evening is someone I haven't spoken to for quite some time. I interviewed him several years ago on Onyx News. Grant Cameron is the recipient of the Leeds Conference International Researcher of the Year and the UFO Congress Researcher of the Year. He became involved in ufology as the Vietnam War ended in May of 1975 with personal sightings of a UFO-type object, which locally became known as Charlie Red Star. These sightings led to a decade of research into the early 1950s work done by the Canadian government into the flying saucer phenomena. Cameron became the authority on the Canadian government program and on Wilbert B. Smith, who headed it up. This led to an investigation of the role in the UFO cover-up by the former president of Penn State University. The results of this research became the book UFOs, Area 51, and the Government in 1991. Cameron proceeded to do almost 3 decades of research into the role of the President of the United States in the UFO mystery. Most of that research can be found at the President's UFO website, www.presidentialufo.com, and in his 2017 book, Managing Magic, the Government's UFO Disclosure Plan. After experiencing a mental download event on February 26, 2012, Cameron turned his research interests away from nuts and bolts research to the role of consciousness in the UFO phenomena. This new research has expanded out to the possible involvement of extraterrestrials in modern music and in the phenomena of inspiration and downloads in science discoveries. Welcome to the program, Grant.
Have me on. Good to talk to you again.
Well, it's great to talk to you again. It's been too long.
Yeah.
You've been doing a lot in between the last time we spoke, and I'm very interested in everything you're doing. I've had hands-on with what you're talking about. let's go to music for just a minute, if you wouldn't mind. I've had my own strange experiences with music, but how did you get interested in that?
I have no interest in music. I don't play an instrument. My whole family was musical. My mother was a church organist for 40 years. I'm a radio talk guy and now a podcast guy. I listen to podcasts all the time. What happened was I had an experience in about 2013 with Chris Bledsoe at his house. Very dramatic experience there. And I got to know him fairly well. In 2014, I wrote a book called Alien Bedtime Stories, where I tell his whole story in there. And some of the stuff that's not in his new book, it was in 2014. So I knew him fairly well, and I had a couple of experiences. I saw him heal somebody, and I knew he was sort of like the real deal guy. And he phoned me up in about 2014, and he said, "Oh, Grant, I got a message to you from the Guardians. This is one of 4 messages I've gotten from different aliens or whoever they are, from different experiencers who say they've got a message for me." And the message, he said, the Guardians have a message for you. I said, "Really? The Guardians have a message for me?" I said, "What do they want me to know?" He said, "They want you to know the message is in the music." And I said, "Well, Chris, you may be talking to the wrong guy, because I don't like music. I don't listen to music. I can't play music. I have no interest in music." He said, "Wait, you should listen to the song called Kashmir by Led Zeppelin." I go, "Whatever." It's like, and he's talking and I'm sort of ignoring him. And he's getting this indication that he was given this about the music. And then he says, and this is what I've found in my whole career, is that you get dragged into these rabbit holes. I had no intention of a UFO sighting. I had no intention to do anything I ever did. I always get dragged in these rabbit holes. You have these real dramatic synchronicities that basically say, "Holy cow, what's going on here?" And down the rabbit hole you go. So he said, Kashmir, and I said, "Okay, whatever," and he's talking. And then he said, "And the other one you should listen to is After the Gold Rush by Neil Young." And I said, "Neil Young? Neil Young's involved in this thing?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Neil Young was born in Toronto, Canada, but he grew up in Winnipeg. And Winnipeg is the city in Canada where not even people in Canada want to visit. It's the coldest major city in the world. Nobody wants to come here, but Neil Young grew up here." I said, "Neil Young is involved?" Now he's in California. I said, "Neil Young's involved in this?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, I'm going to check this out." So I go and I check the song. And if you've seen this song, After the Gold Rush, it talks about the fact that we're treating the world like a gold rush. And when the gold is gone, the silver seeds are going to come. It's going to become a ghost town. The silver seeds are going to come, and they're going to take the chosen ones, which is what Yvonne Smith calls the experiencers, going to take them to another planet. This is in the song, that these silver seeds are going to come and take people off the planet. And I'm going, this is kind of weird. And then I started to discover that a bunch of other people, Patti Smith, the first woman to sing on Saturday Night Live, and just piles of them, the Flaming Lips and all these different groups, they all sung After the Gold Rush. And they're all experiencers. And I started to realize, like, this is pretty weird. You know, all these. And then I started to go through, and I basically looked at the number of major musicians who are experiencers, who had contact. And then I also looked at, because I had the download inspiration experience in 2012. I was also looking at inspiration of musicians. So I look at, for example, the Paul McCartney's 2 songs. The one was Let It Be. And most people don't really realize everything that has to do with the Bible, Mother Mary in the Bible. It's not Mother Mary in the Bible. It's his mother. He's having the tough time at the end of the 1990s. He's getting divorced. He's on drugs. The Beatles are breaking up. Yoko Ono's there driving them all nuts and whatever, and he's all disturbed. And his mother comes to him in a dream. She said, "Paul, it'll be okay. Let it be." And that's why he sings the song. When in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be, let it be. And so I go through all these different songs the one, and the name's escaping me, that is a very famous song. Is the most produced song of the 20th century. He wakes up in the middle of the night and the song's in his head, and he gets on the piano and he plays this thing. He gets it, and then he doesn't put the lyrics in, but he's got the song, and then he goes around to people and said, "You ever heard the song before?" Because he figured for sure somebody had played the song. He was just remembering somebody's song, and nope, nobody ever heard the song. And it was, so that was the thing, is I looked at how many songs come in dreams, and it was like 150 songs. How many songs come in under 10 minutes? And that's a lot. And the pattern is that almost every one of those songs is an A side, probably the most famous song the guy ever wrote, all of them came this way. It was never a B-side song. It was never some useless thing that nobody's ever heard about. Old Little Town of Bethlehem, Battle Hymn of the Republic. You can take even musicians outside of rock and roll. It's just a fascinating story. And so I wrote it up. And then I was going to do a second book. I actually started to get some other ones with, a guy that got an entire symphony in his head. When his son died, his son dies at birth. And the Roman Catholics won't let him bury the kid in the cemetery. And he's got him in a little shoebox. And he manages to bury this kid. His wife's still in the hospital. And he gets this entire symphony, which he collects £1 million to get it produced by the London Philharmonic Orchestra. And they actually play this thing. And they said it was the only time that the London Philharmonic Orchestra ever stood up and applauded a composer. And you have these really weird songs about where does stuff come from? And that goes to everything, like inventions. When I wrote the book Inspired, where do inventions come from? People think, oh, the person's really smart. He figured it out. No, they're sitting on a park bench and all of a sudden, boom, the idea pops in their head, the laser.
Yeah. Like Tesla.
Yeah, Tesla, all of them. You take all the Einstein's theory of relativity came in a dream. Bohr's idea of the atom came in a dream. Heisenberg's idea of the uncertainty principle came walking behind the Bohr Institute, watching some guy come in the dark, out of the dark. He's in the middle of the night. He's walking under these lights and then into the darkness, into the light. And this idea flashed into his head. And that's what people have to realize is that I think that my impression is everything is in the field. All the answers are in the field. And it's the ability to shut down the left brain ego and get in the field. And some people can do it through meditation, through hypnosis, through channeling, through whatever technique they're using, or head injuries. A lot of trauma creates this kind of stuff, but it's all there and it's accessible to everybody. And that's what musicians can do because they're very right brain. Musicians are not left brain. The left brain people really don't invent everything. They take a look at, there was a study done in California of the 1,540 smartest kids in California in 1915, I think it was. They followed these kids. It's the longest longitudinal study ever done in psychology. And they followed all these kids through their entire life. And these are kids had 140 IQ to get in. 25% of these kids had an IQ of 180 in California. Not one of them won a Nobel Prize. Not one of them did anything. There was one who was the head of the American Psychological Association. Other than that, a lot of them are just ordinary people. And so people equate smartness with invention. A lot of invention stuff you'll see comes by people just getting these sort of downloads and inspirations, or they're just fascinated with the subject. But you gotta shut down that left brain, the left brain ego that causes almost all the problems in the world.
That would explain why a lot of scientists are unable to understand anything that's not physical, that's not 3D. Once you get into spirit realm or other dimensions or contact with interdimensionals, they shut down.
Yeah, I've found that I actually go after scientists because I worked one of the biggest jobs, the best jobs I ever had that taught me the most was I was a bartender at the Faculty Club Lounge at the University of Manitoba for a number of years when I was going to school and just after I was going to school and stuff like that. And what I learned was I dealt with academics all the time. I mean, and academics who were taking it easy and drinking and stuff like that. And I came to realize that it's a big deal to be an academic, to be a scientist. So it's really cool. And we used to play these games where, the cleaner would be in the building and he played this game. He would say to somebody, "Hey, good morning, doctor." And the guy only had a master's degree, but he said nobody ever corrected him and said, I'm not a PhD. Sorry, I'm just a master's. And it was this status thing. Or scientists will say, "I'm a scientist." And it's like, no, you're not a scientist. You're an entomologist. You're a chemist. You're a physicist. You're a biologist or whatever. But that doesn't mean that you can fix my toilet. Doesn't mean you can do a root canal on me or anything like that. And it's sort of this idea that science is sort of taken over. And it's become this sort of a physical thing where it's all physical. And what I say is if there's ever a revelation of exactly what's going on, and people say, "Oh, the religious people, they're all gonna go crazy." It's not the religious people. It's going to be the scientists who are going to be fighting over the cyanide pills. I guarantee you, because you spend $50,000 a year to go to MIT and suddenly you figure out, oh my God, it was all garbage. There's just nobody's going to want to admit that everything that they believed is wrong. And that's the problem that we have. Is Mark Twain said, "It's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that it just ain't so." And that's what the whole problem is, that these guys have spent a lot of time and a lot of money getting degrees, and they aren't about to back off anything. Plus, it's not in their field. UFO phenomena or spiritual stuff is not in anybody's scientific field. It's like I'm doing chemistry. I'm having a hard time keeping up with my little tiny chemistry area that I'm a specialty in, and there are specialties in that area. But when you get outside that, I remember I had in the faculty club lounge, I had 3 deans who used to talk to me about UFOs. And the one was the head of plant science, the dean of plant science. And he used to drink all the time. He'd sit at the bar all night long and we'd chat, and he would sort of bug me about UFOs and stuff. And then he would play the skeptic. And at one point I said to him, I said, hey, you're a plant scientist. You know how to grow a rose. You don't know nothing about UFOs. He said, yeah, you're right. And that's what I realized.
Yeah.
And that's what they told me when I was being trained. They said, when these guys have one too many beers, just remember, they're no better than anybody else on the street. They're the same as everybody else on the street. They just have a specialty. And we even had a joke where a lot of scientists, what it is they get a bachelor's degree, and they don't want to go. They like it. They don't want to go to get a job. So then they say, well, I'll get a master's degree. Then they get a master's degree because they're going to make more money. Then they go to try to get a job, and nobody will hire them because they got no experience. And then they go, what am I going to do? I got a master's degree now. What the hell am I going to do? And then they say, well, I'll get a PhD and I can teach it. So we used to call it, a PhD was called piled higher and deeper. And we had a lot of people who had 2 PhD degrees and people who loved to be in school who basically never left school. So the scientific thing is, there's a scientific method, but it's turned into a religion where someone says, I'm a scientist and I can, I know everything about everything. And no, you don't. You know one little particular area of science, but science is an investigation. It's putting out a hypothesis, doing an experiment, doing observations, making a conclusion, and then developing another hypothesis and just going through this thing. And you don't have to be a scientist to do that. Everybody can use that method of investigation. And so I'm sort of getting sort of grumpy in my old age, and I'm writing more and more about this thing that science has totally messed this thing up, that science will never figure this thing out because they're stuck in their own little route, their own little rut of what they know and what they think is going on. And they're not about to give up. I mean, I make the example of Stanton Friedman. I went after his files. Stan had, all right, for 61 years, he worked on this thing. And he argued with everybody, Phil Klass, Menzel, Oberg, and I had the mistake arguing with Oberg and stuff. All the top skeptics, Sagan, all this sort of stuff. And the question was, how many people did he ever convince in terms of the skeptics? None. Because their mind is made up. They're making proclamations. And that's what people have to realize is we have to do the job ourselves. And the chances of you converting some, very left brain, because science is very left brain. It's rational, analytical. And when you take a look at experiments that were done with split brain patients, where you split the brain and then you give a signal to one side or the other side, what they found out is the left brain makes stuff up. Because it's the one that talks. So when you're talking to it, you'll have 2 pieces of evidence, and then they'll send a message to the right brain. And because the brains are separated, their left brain, the talker, doesn't know what happened. And they say, why did you get up and walk around? And the left brain will literally make up something, and it'll make up something. And then once it gets cornered, it will maintain that, even though it has no idea. Instead of saying, I don't know why I got up and walked around, and it'll make up, I was tired or whatever. And that's what they found. And the thing was that they stated that the left brain was never right. It was wrong every single time it made a guess. And that's what's happening is the left brain, the rational analytical brain, is trying to fill in the gaps. So there's these gaps, and it just fills in with what it knows. And the right brain is the female brain, and that's the one that has the experiences. So people will say, that's anecdotal. I don't want to hear your story about your spiritual experience or whatever. I'm smart. I'm an rational, analytical, or whatever. Those people are the believers. The people who know are the people who have had the experiences. End of story. The only time you can know something is when you've had the experience. Otherwise, you're just filling it in with stuff that you were taught in school. And what we find is with the flat earth, with the sun going around the earth, even 100 years ago, the big debate about is there more than one galaxy? And the top astronomer in 1920 was arguing, no, there's only one galaxy. Don't tell me any different. I'm the expert. And so we've been wrong. And because there's UFOs, that's an anomaly. What we have to realize is that the paranormal phenomena is anomalies. And if it's happening, which it is happening, we mean something very simple. You got something wrong. something you believe is wrong and you got to figure it out. But in science, it's the idea where it's almost like Michelson said in 1896. He said, we've discovered everything. Now we just got to take everything to 6 decimal places. Or Max Planck's professor, Joly, in 1874 said, Max Planck, the guy that invented quantum physics, said, no use going into physics, Max. We've discovered everything. You're wasting your time. Don't go into physics. And that's the thing is we always figure, scientists figure, we got it all figured out. We just got one more piece of the puzzle. And when you start looking at the paranormal phenomena or the UFO phenomena, what you realize is that none of the pieces fit. Nothing fits. It's just, it gets weirder and more complex as you go along. And that's the attitude you got to take. And then you got to listen, particularly, which is still being ignored. You got to listen to the experiencers, the people who are interacting with the phenomena. We're still under this idea of gathering sightings. And there's even one that I just cataloged, which is the one at Skinwalker Ranch where Colm Kelleher tells a story where they have these guys with the night vision binoculars. And they're there, and 6 people all have the same night vision binoculars. And suddenly this thing comes over the ridge and comes towards them. And they're sitting there in the binoculars and watching this. And then at the end of the night, they're doing the debrief and everybody saw something different. So what does that mean? Well, what difference if UFOs can morph, if they can change shape, as they did twice with me, started as one object, and when it finally got to me, it was a different object. We're sort of relying on this people on the outside. You got to listen to the people who are interacting with the intelligence. And I think that's the important thing that ufology is leaving out.
Yeah. Stanton used to say, call the skeptics the noisy negativists.
Yeah.
And he would explain that he'd have a debate with them. They never studied UFOs.
Yeah.
Well, if they're scientists, why aren't they studying UFOs so they would know more about them? They just close that wall and say it doesn't exist. Therefore, I don't believe it exists. Therefore, it doesn't.
Yeah. And that's the thing. People got to realize that scientists are very, very compartmentalized. If you're a chemist, say you got your PhD in biological chemistry, that's all you know. I mean, you don't know physics. Most of them, I make this joke, like the entomology building, because I ran all the buildings at the University of Manitoba, or 1/3 of them at a time. And the entomology building, which is all insects and stuff, I'll guarantee you 99% of people at the University of Manitoba have never been in that building, because it's on one side, and that the chemistry guys are busy. They've got to keep up with their own field. They're reading all the latest literature in biological chemistry. They don't know anything about physics. They don't know anything about mathematics. And the other thing that we have is a kind of a joke where it's sort of people have gotten away with it, is you have the skeptic Bill Nye the Science Guy. Well, Bill Nye the Science Guy ain't a scientist. He's an engineer, and there's a big difference between an engineer and a scientist. You can go through an entire engineering degree and never take a science course. I mean, you don't need a science course to build a road. And that's what people don't realize, is that we're playing these little games of say, I'm a scientist, I know everything. And people buy that. They actually think, oh, the guy says he's a scientist, so he gets to talk about everything. And what you come down to is this idea of the dean of plant science, that the guy has no clue about UFOs. He knows a lot about plants. So if they're in that area. But this is where Stan did point this out, that these guys, they talk, and they figure they're good, rational, analytical. They can argue on their feet, and they can beat you at an argument. They don't need to have an experience. They can just whatever it is. And I guess we mistakenly teach kids that in school. We say, okay, Margie, you take this side of the debate, and you take this side of the debate. And the kid, even though he doesn't believe it, has to take that side of the debate. And they learn this thing about, finding the weakness in your opponent's argument and stuff like that. And it's all this, little games, the ends justifies the means and stuff. But science is you have to use the scientific method in terms of understanding this. But even the idea of Descartes, the guy who came up with the scientific method, got it in a dream. In 2 to 3 nights, he got it in a dream. They leave that part of the story out. The other part of the story they leave out is he didn't say to be skeptical of new ideas. He said be skeptical of old ideas. In fact, Descartes said, I figure that I'm going to have to throw out everything I've ever learned. And that's what you got to be skeptical of. The stuff that that just ain't so. You think, oh, this is right. And it's not right. If it were right, these UFOs would not be happening. This paranormal stuff would not be happening. It means something you've got is wrong. But science doesn't want to admit that. They want to figure we've got it all figured out. We're really smart guys. We're rational, analytical. And that, to me, that's not going to solve the problem.
No, it most certainly isn't. And a few of them are waking up. The physicists seem to be the most open-minded because they're actually dealing in dimensions now. So, that helps a little bit. we have been talking about, let me find it. Okay, here we go. We talked about that for a little bit. You've got a ton of books, and we're going to talk about some of these when we come back in just a few minutes. I'm going to show all of these that I downloaded off your site. Grant doesn't do anything but research and write books. I can tell that right now.
I have no life.
you have no life, except you have a very exciting life.
Yes.
And it's not boring.
Yeah. As I always say, I live in the Super Bowl every single day. Some people get to go to the Super Bowl once in life. I live in it every day.
All right. We are going to be back right after these messages with Grant Cameron. This is Margie K. Don't go away. Are you thinking about purchasing a wood-fired heating or cooking appliance but don't know where to start? The new book, Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking, will guide you through the process and make the decision much easier. Find out about wood stoves, wood-burning fireplace inserts, masonry heaters, cook stoves, brick ovens, and more. Learn about operation and maintenance, buying and storing wood, even how to make your own charcoal. A bonus section includes delicious recipes for cooking in a wood-burning oven, grill, tandoori oven, or smoker. The wise homeowner, prepper, or homesteader will have the ability to heat their home with wood when the power goes out or to save money on increasing gas bills. Wood-fired heating and cooking is available at Amazon. Visit www.woodfiredpub.com for more information. That's woodfiredpub.com. And we're back with NX News. I'm your host, Margie K., and my guest this evening is Grant Cameron. Grant, before the break, I brought this up, and I would like to talk about this book for just a minute, about the contact modalities, the keys to the universe. What is this book about?
Well, this is the idea that everything is in the field and that different modalities, they're different. In the book, I think we go about through 70 plus modalities of ways that people get in the field. And that would involve like meditation, hypnosis, head injuries, near-death experiences, psychedelics, and it all comes down to the same thing. It's the ability to shut down the left brain, where you, like in a hypnosis thing, you say, okay, left brain, can you walk down the stairs? Oh, I'm the best walker down the stairs ever. And you walk them down the stairs and say, can you go through that door? Yeah, I can do that. And say, go there and close the door behind you. And we're going to work with the client here, and we'll call you back when we need you. And that's the whole deal. And some people can do it and some people can't. And it's the levels. So you have some people, it's like piano players. Some people are very good channelers. Some people are not too bad channelers. Some are lousy channelers. And it's this idea, how far can you get in the field? And because if you take a look at UFO experiences, 40% of all people who've had UFO experiences say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And I would actually ask these people, I'd say, so how do you know you knew everything? How do you know it wasn't like number 6, 7, 8 on the far side of the universe they forgot to tell you about? And they'll say exactly what happened with my download experience. I'm not sure. I just know. And it's this knowing. I know. There's no question. And the same with out-of-body experience. You see all this connection between all these modalities. It's all the same thing. So 31% of all near-death experience people say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And that would indicate that everything is in there. And it's the ability to go in like a musician, go into the field, grab the material and come back. Now, musicians will bring it back fully intact, which is kind of weird because a lot of times the material you're going to get is like an image. Like the right brain is all in images. There's no writing. That's why remote viewers have a hard time reading stuff because it's all imagery. It's artistic and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so you have this ability to grab the material and decode it. And when it comes to people who are able to go straight in like the channelers, there's even stuff that I think will change the world in terms of trans channelers. The one that started this whole thing for me was J.Z. Knight, who claimed that she had done DNA experiments when she was Ramtha. They did 3 DNA tests. One when she was normal, when she was Ramtha, and the one showed that she was female French, and the other one showed she was male Icelandic or whatever it was. And I've been trying to run this DNA test with a trans channeler ever since. And we came close a number of times. Bashar agreed to do it. The most famous physical medium agreed to do it. And that's another one. Like you have physical mediums, you have all these kind of people who are able to get in the field. And I firmly believe that if you get a trans channeler, not just a channeler, it has to be someone where somebody actually takes over the body. Mm-hmm. I say the DNA will change because you can take a look at people like Paul Selleck, who says, and he doesn't even know. He says, I'm channeling, and then I'm channeling, and the people will say to me in the first row, they say, "Hey, your eyes changed. Your eyes changed to bright blue." And then I was waiting, and then he finally said, "Oh, my spirit guide. When I meditate, my spirit guide is there, and he wears this weird looking hat, and he's got really bright blue eyes." And I go, "Yeah, exactly." And that's the whole deal. Or when what's his name, Lynn Buchanan, when he melded with Saddam Hussein. When he did the mind meld with Saddam Hussein, his eyes changed to brown. And that's this whole thing. That's DNA. The DNA is changing, and that would change the whole world. If you suddenly realize that consciousness is not the physical thing we think it is. It's what tracks all the stuff, and it gathers the information and stuff like that. But if you get somebody to take over the body, I'm thrilled to try to do this experiment. I've got a number of people that I think would have qualified, but it's a matter of just doing 2 DNA tests, which costs about $90 each. One before you do it, one you do it after. I know Ions is doing the DNA, but they're doing it after the person's done it. And I'm going and I tried to get a hold of them, and they just sort of ignored me. Like, "We're busy, send it through." They didn't even want to talk to me. And I said, just do a DNA test when they're channeling. Forget about after. They're looking at, can channeling change DNA? Yeah, it can. But instead of doing a test where you take somebody before they're drinking and after they're drinking, that doesn't prove anything. You got to get them when they're drinking. You got to do the test.
Yeah. Well, the entity is in there.
That would change the whole world. That's the one thing I think that I'm trying to push that has to be done experimentally. And the other one is the blindfold kids. And I've talked to all the trainers around the world. I've looked at there's an Olympic team that I encouraged to form in Australia. This would change the world. This whole thing with the kids that run around with the blindfolds, and adults can do it, but not as good as children, where you're seeing 360 degrees, which out-of-body experience people see, which people in UFO experiences, like I had the one with the ones that flew the ship. That called the book was called the UFO Sky Pilots, and those people were reporting I could see in 360 degrees. Well, if you're going to make up a story about being on a UFO, that's not something you want to put in your story. I could see in 360 degrees, but that's the thing. These kids will describe they can see in 360 degrees. You can put the target behind them, above them, below them, whatever. Then they pick up these psychic abilities when they've got the blindfold on, and that's the kind of stuff that I think is very easy research, but it's a matter of getting it done, and we're still basically chasing sightings and stuff like that. I think there's some really interesting stuff that could be done that would change the whole idea of how the world works. Because if somebody can see through a blindfold, some little 5-year-old kid can read a book with a blindfold on, there's something wrong here. You got to start looking at, and then science has got to realize, like, man, we really got something wrong here. Or I do the one with the people who are flying. The one is a Mormon guy out of Price, Utah. And he said, they asked him and said, "Where would you like to go?" And he said, "I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance." And they said, "Okay." sit in the chair, put your hands on this thing. You become one with the craft. And then they said to him, this is going to take about 1 second. It's going to be very intense G-force, and it's within you. Go within yourself. And this is what you start to realize, like, oh, maybe it's all within us. Like the Sufi expression, you see yourself as a puny form when within you is in the entire universe. And they say, go within yourself. And a lot of these people that were flying to other parts of the galaxy, they'd say, go within yourself. It's what you got to imagine. Go within yourself. And he said he thought about where he wanted to go. He said in 1 second, he looked out the window and there was the Milky Way in a distance. And that was about 70,000 light years in 1 second. That means we got something wrong with time and space. There's something really going on. And that's why I think it's so important to listen to the experiencers when they start talking about flying the ship. And I thought that was the first woman that gave that to me. I thought she was totally insane. Like, come on, you're like 70 years old. I mean, a woman in Saudi Arabia can't drive a car unless there's a man in the car. Come on, they let you fly the craft? Yeah, they let me fly the craft. I've flown 3 different models. And I go, they let you fly the flying saucer? It just didn't make any sense. And then she said, yeah. I said, well, how do you do that? She said, you do it with your mind. You put your hand on a panel. You become one with the craft. The craft is alive, and whatever you think is what the craft does. And then these people started. I had a 747 United Airlines pilot, captain. I had a retired U.S. Air Force colonel. Ramirez from CIA has done this. And you start getting this whole deal about the fact that this is the part we're missing. This idea that the craft is bigger on the inside than it is outside, that people are flying the craft and they're using its all consciousness, and this idea that we've got crash material. And in the Wilson leak document, if you've ever done shows on that, the Wilson leak document says we have a craft and we think it'll fly. And I'm going, I know what's going on. They got a craft and they can't turn it on because it needs a consciousness interface. Someone has to turn it on with their consciousness. And that's why it's so far removed that they put it on the shelf and they can't figure it out, because they're in this materialistic paradigm. It's got to be material. You got to be able to weigh it and reproduce it in the lab and all this kind of stuff. And it's not. It's this idea. Almost like the dual slit experiment, that when you look at it, it turns into a particle. If you don't look at it, it doesn't turn into a particle. There is no matter until there's an observer, and this kind of thing. So I'm encouraged with the stuff, but it's moving pretty slow compared to the way I'd like it to work, in terms of where I think we're spending a lot of time doing a lot of crazy things. We're just redoing the sighting thing all over. Even the Canadians are about to come out with a report, a public report, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to ignore what happened in the early 1950s when the Canadians were told this is for real. It's the most highly classified site in the United States. And they're going to go into this thing. How do we track sightings? How do we log them? Where are the most sightings? And it's like, oh, we did that for 80 years. We're going to do it again and again. And nobody's going to talk to me. Nobody's going to talk to experiencers. Nobody's going to talk to the people who really matter, the ones that are interacting. And I think they're interacting for a reason. This is not random. They're part of a plan of disclosure by whoever this intelligence is, that these people, this is part of the disclosure. And it's like the government. The intelligence is not disclosing. They're just poking us. And this is the next book I'm working on. I'm calling Wake Up, where they just try to keep you awake, poke you, give you little breadcrumbs and make you go, what's going on? What's going on? And it's almost like science. Science advances because of curiosity. You want to solve the next thing and the next thing. And that's how science, and the same thing with us. It advances because they keep dropping these new little breadcrumbs, and we're trying to figure out what this is. And as we figure it out, we suddenly realize, oh, consciousness is part of this thing. This is not as material as we think it is. They can morph. You start to realize all these different things. Or how do you move across the galaxy when people say they're flying the craft? And I had 36 people. It's not one person. And they're all telling this absolutely what Jacques Vallée would call a totally absurd story that you would not make up if you said, oh, yeah, I went inside the craft and it was 30 feet on the outside. And inside it was as big as a football stadium. And I was flying the craft. And people go, yeah, sure you were. That's the kind of stuff that the more absurd the story is, the more it's true. That nobody's going to make that kind of stuff up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think science is being left behind as disclosure is happening on its own.
Yeah.
And also the number of people who are having experiences is increasing.
Yeah.
And people are waking up and they're having these contact experiences. And I mean, I talk to people every day about it, and some people are a little shaken by it.
Yeah.
Some people are okay. They're ready for it. And others are kind of freaking out when they see an ET standing in their bedroom. And they're trying to make contact. They're trying to make people become more aware. And in my experience, they're only there to help us raise consciousness. And I'm just looking forward to that. Keep it on going and just ignore the scientists.
Yeah,
Let's
I
just
think it'll eventually come, because I've been in this since 1975, so I've been in it for almost 50 years, and I remember back in the day, people always think it's always the same. No, it's a completely different world than it was in 1975. There's no more landing traces. There's basically the one or two cattle mutilations, not like it was in the 70s. And now we've got orbs, and there was really no discussion of orbs. We used to call them ground lights and stuff like that. And you see that the thing is changing, and what happens is it's almost like whatever movement you've got, whether it's African American rights or whatever it is, there's a lot of movies made and bad jokes and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter. Every time we talk about it, as long as they spell your name right, this idea, where as long as we talk about it, the consciousness rises. And then what happens in 2016, I wrote an article called The 64 Reasons That Decided Not to Tell You the Truth. And that was in 2009. And it was this idea that the stock market is going to melt down if they admit they're doing UFOs and stuff like that. And what happened in 2017 when they announced it? Absolutely nothing. Nobody committed suicide. Nobody jumped out of a window. Nothing. And that was because people are acclimatized. People going, oh yeah, I know that already. Okay, so where are they from? And then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It just slowly moves. Almost like Max Planck says, science does not advance by you convincing your opponent that you're right. Science advances one funeral at a time. The old ideas die off, and the new generation is not offended with the idea. And that's what's happening. You can go to a kid now and say, hey, do you believe there's multi-dimensions? Do you believe there's portals? And the kid will go, of course there is. I mean, that's what's changing, is give it another 30 or 40 years, and people will all be on the same page. And all these old ideas will die out. And I don't think we can try to convince these people that doesn't work. It's never worked. Just leave them have their idea. And we have to just gather the evidence that's important to try to put out there into the zeitgeist or whatever, and it will move on its own.
Speaking of children, new children coming in, star children, star people, young adults, I have been seeing lately, and if I'm talking to somebody for a while, I kind of shift consciousness, and I'm seeing, and I want to know if you've seen this yourself, the pupils change shape. There'll be a square, there'll be a rectangle, a star, a rectangle with two little weird things coming off of it. I've seen probably 15 or 20 people now that I'm speaking with, and most of them have blue eyes, by the way.
Wow.
A few of them have brown eyes.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at that, and then I hear the word hybrid in my head.
Yeah.
Have you run into that?
Well, I'm familiar with like Mary Rodwell's work that she's done a lot with the children, but I haven't dealt with really any children. When I had in 75, I had the one kid I was dealing with, but no, I haven't dealt with that. I guess I'm more into the channelers, the experiencers. That's an interesting thing, because it comes to this idea of remembering who you actually are. What's this all about? When you get to the bottom line, it's not about UFOs. It's not about psychic phenomena. It's about what the heck's going on here. What are we doing here? Like, how do we get here? Why do we come into the earth? And what's going to happen when we leave? And I'm a big Michael Newton fan, where when you leave, you go in front of this panel between 3 and 12 people, and they say to you one question: how'd it work out? Because you planned it. You had the whole thing, you planned it, and then you say, oh, everybody always says the same thing. I could have done better. Oh, I forgot to do this. I'll do it next time. I forgot I was going to do this, and I got scared. And so that when you look at the kids, you see this situation where these kids are coming in on purpose. This is not random. They're coming in almost like Dolores Cannon talked about the 3 waves, the first, second, and third wave as they come in. And it's almost like the experience, the UFO phenomena has maybe done this on 1,000 different planets before. They send in the wooden ships for 1895. When we discovered radioactivity, the ships were there, and they said they were from Mars, and they're hanging down off of ropes, and had these big lights on them when they didn't have batteries. And then you had the Foo Fighters, then the green fireballs, then the Adamski crafts with the balls under them, and then the triangles, and it just morphs us from one thing to another, and they're just changing the pages. People have to realize that the phenomena is not the same all the time. It just morphs. It never does the same thing twice. It just goes along. And these kids would be part of this plan, that they are coming in to do whatever that. And I look at that way myself, like all the things that happened to me. I had no interest in UFOs when I first got in. And it was sort of like, once it happens, you go, oh yeah, it's like almost like someone shows you something. So, oh, I remember now. And that's the whole deal, is all you have to do is remember that you came in for a reason. You're going to be asked a question how to work out when you leave. And all you got to do is worry about, what am I here to do? And am I doing it? And forget about what everybody else is doing. And that comes to these kids. What are these kids doing? And they probably have this role of moving it to the next step, that you and I are going to die away, and they're going to come in and move it to the next level. And eventually it'll all work. Because like you hear a lot of experiencers will talk about the fact everything's absolutely perfect. I even did a show with 3 different people. One was a near-death experiencer. One was a UFO experiencer. One was a guy who was in float tanks. He was an expert at working in float tanks and getting all the senses gone. And they all said the same thing. They said everything's exactly the way it's supposed to be. It's exactly perfect. And this whole idea that it's all a play, that we're in this play, and people say, oh, it's terrible. This is going on. And it's like, hey, remember, whatever mess you find yourself in at this time and place, you agreed to be in the middle of this mess. And perhaps you're in the middle of the mess because you agreed to come here and try to change the mess. So quit complaining about the mess and figuring out, what am I supposed to do? It's just an experience. It's like if you got abducted 3 lifetimes ago, you're like, oh, I'm still upset about that abduction 3 lifetimes. And no, it's like, it was an experience ago. That was pretty cool. I got abducted 3 lifetimes ago. And when we look at it now, we enter this whole thing of the ego, that the left brain, rational, analytical brain is taken over. We have this idea where we sort of forget that it's life, death, life, death, life, death, that 330 billion cells die in the human body every day. And nobody has a compassion meditation. Oh, those poor cells. I'm so happy that they gave their lives so I could have new cells to, regenerate my body, whatever. It's not. It's like, who cares? It's only when the ego cell's dying. It's like, I'm dying. Oh my God, yours a doctor. I need a healer. And it's like, the person's freaking out. And that's what we've got to realize, is that it may all be just a play. All the world's a stage. All the men and women and aliens are but actors. We have our entrances and exits, and each man plays many roles. It's just a play, and we're trying to figure out what we are. And remember, all spiritual literature, you probably know, all spiritual literature, the basic bottom line of all spiritual literature is, remember who you actually are. You are not the player on the stage. Because you played King Henry VIII in grade 12 does not mean you're now King Henry VIII. You're not. You played King Henry VIII. You are the person behind when you float out of your body at death or in an out-of-body experience. That's you. You are not the body. And we've gotten into this thing of the physical world, and the ego says, it's me, it's the body, I'm this. And this whole UFO and spiritual phenomena is breaking that away and saying, no, that's not true. You are a higher thing, and you've come in to play these roles, and you're here to help, to do whatever you're here to do. And everybody has a role. And the problem that we have, even though that's the way it is that most people don't even think about it. They're so busy making a living, they don't think about it until someone says, you got 3 months to live. And then they go, hey, what's going on? Why am I here? Like, where am I going to go? I'm going to die. It's like, and then they start freaking out. Whereas you and I, that's why I say I live in the Super Bowl every single day. I mean, if you realize what's going on, we could have been an untouchable in the streets of Calcutta and spend our day in a junkyard looking for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow. That's not what we got. We got to play the UFO game. That is the biggest game. We're in the Super Bowl every day, and you got to realize we're on the leading edge, and we should be on our knees thanking God every day that we got to play this game the way we did.
Well, Grant, that is a good way to look at things. And I think that's going to change a lot of people's ideas and their thought patterns, because, we're playing in a play. And that's so weird, because my father used to say that all the time as well. That's kind of,
but the ego wants to have this thing where it's the center of the attention. It's about me, and it's about I'm actually here, and I'm for real. And that's why people are so changed. Like, you have the near-death experience. People don't realize it's very traumatic as well. Near-death experience, 75 to 80% of people get divorced after they've had a near-death experience. It's because you aren't the same person. It's like wake-up time. It's like, oh my God. It's like, I can't believe that you suddenly realize that it's not the world you thought it was. And the ego takes a backstage. You realize, like, it's not that voice in your head. You are not the voice in the head.
Yeah. It's not about you.
Yeah.
It's about the universe. Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left. I want to just ask you about this book, about Mount Shasta. Can you briefly talk about that?
Okay, this all has to do. There's 2 books on Mount Shasta, and they have to do with 2 guys. Enrique Villanueva is one, and Ricardo Gonzalez, and these are Mission Rama people. And so I say, you got to remember that your impression of what you see, you got to remember you're part of what you see. If you're familiar with the Philip experiment in Canada, where they make a ghost appear, 8 people, they do this thing where they're meditating, they can't get it to work, and they make up this ghost. They make up a character from the 16th century, and
Yes.
and then they actually make the ghost appear. And what you got to realize is that if you can build a house in the physical world, you can build a house in the spiritual world, and that's what we can do. So the Mission Rama people are completely different. I defy anybody to go to Mission Rama. There's 25,000 of these people. They're mostly Latinos. All started in Peru and Brazil and Peru, and they've gone around the world. I defy anybody to find a gray or a reptilian or a mantid in there. They're all they've got the blonde hair. They're all muscular, and there's all of these things, and it's very spiritual. And that's what they're seeing. They're having this. So I went on to 2 different groups, and that's one of the ones I got the message. I was going to the one girl who was helping me. She was a Latino girl who's helped me edit books. And she said, come to meditate on the mountain in Mount Shasta. And I go, Katerina, I got nothing against meditation or world peace or whatever, but I don't really want to sit on a mountain. And she finally, I said, well, she's helping me. So I figured, I'll go sit there. And as I'm going with my assistant, we're driving across into Reno the second day. It's a 3-day drive. And then suddenly the message comes and says, oh, there's a message from Aunt Terrell, the alien, for you. I go, there's a message for me. And after I'd gotten the one from Chris, I said, get exactly what's the message saying. What? Because they wanted me to put it on Facebook. And when I got there, they have this thing where these things appear. They call them program sightings, where they can tell exactly when it's going to happen to the minute. And they had it 9:33. This thing happened over my head. So that was the first one. And then there was another Mission Rama group across the road. And I said to them, what was going on your side of the road? We had this thing over at 9:33, and they had everything. They had aliens and all sorts of stuff going on. And so then I decided I'd go back and do with them. And when I went back with them, it was even weirder. It was like they are able to what they do is they raise their vibration by oming and meditating and stuff like that. And the beings lower their vibration. They can open these portals, these Zendras. And I even had the CIA want to send someone to there to see how this is working, because the CIA understands this portal thing. So they want to send somebody there with me to this Zendra thing. And they didn't want no CIA people there. But this is the whole deal. Like, it's a very interesting movement. Started in 1974, just before I got involved. And it's a completely different world, but it's this totally different types of aliens that are there, and these religious messages and program sightings and portals and people stepping through portals and going on to other planets, and just the most bizarre thing. And I talked to these people that were in the Zendra, and I'd say, hey, what did you see? I was on this 10-foot alien. And they go, next person, you were in the Zendra? Yeah. What'd you see? Oh, it's this 10-foot alien. And they all had different experiences. The same thing as the people at Skinwalker Ranch. They all had different experiences. And you start realizing there's this mental component that even though everybody's looking at the same thing, there's 10 different experiences taking place. It's all different. So we are part of the experience that we're happening. It's not something happening to us. We are part of what's happening to us.
Yes. I think more people are waking up to that and feel the same way. They're feeling, and it seems to me that people who have UFO sightings or contact with extraterrestrials also learn to have better contact with other humans, and they have more empathy for humans. Do you find that to be true?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it revolutionizes people's lives. I mean, they for some, it's extremely traumatic, but when you've gone through that, you realize it's this. I think the number one message of the intelligence is oneness. That is absolutely, for me, like the one guy talked to the tall gray. So what's your concept of God? And the guy said, we are one with the one who is all. Bashar, the channeler, says, the one is the all are the one. Edgar Casey said, one should be the first rule for 6 days. Oneness of purpose, oneness of this, oneness. And the oneness is the message. If you realize you're all the same thing. Ronald Reagan, how we would all unite if we were faced by an alien threat. We'd all realize we're just human beings. We're all just children of God. That's the basic message. We're all the same thing. There's no difference between you and me. And or the idea, what you separate from the divine and put into darkness will drag you into the darkness with it. What you damns you back. What you blesses you in return. To say I am divine and you are not divine is the shadow pretending to be the light. It's all divine. It's all one thing. And that's the whole concept that they're trying to get to us, is when you realize you're part of the planet and you're destroying the planet, it's part of you. You can't, whatever you do to the planet, affects the planet. Whatever you do to somebody beside you affects you. And we're all the same thing. And if everybody works as like a football team in the Super Bowl, we all learn the huddle and we all do exactly what we're supposed to do, we will win the game. But if half of the people are saying, I'm not going to do it, don't tell me what to do, and everybody's fighting, and you're not going to win the game. It's about oneness. That's the main message, I believe, that's behind this whole thing. Oneness.
That is an excellent note to end on. Thank you so much for being on the program, Grant. How can people find you?
I have a Weebly site. I don't have the presidential site anymore. I have a Carter book, so I'm converting some of the presidential stuff into books. I did one on the Clintons. I'm doing one on Carter, and I'll definitely be doing one on the Obamas, because the Obama will have absolutely massive files. I've already filed for them. I know how many pages I've got coming. I know that what was going on behind the scenes. So I don't have that, but I have a Weebly site. It's all connected, which is the oneness message. It's all connected. One word.
Got that here.
Weebly. And Facebook, I post every day, and Twitter, I post the conspiracy stuff. On the Facebook, I post more stuff about spirituality and stuff like this. So those are the places where they can get a hold of me. And if they want a private email, whitehouseuFO@gmail.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Grant Cameron. This is Margie Kay. Hope you'll join me again here next week.